Her name is CHERYL Marie Wade, and I think she is the #1 disability poet in the nation. And CHERYL has the horrible task today of trying to define disability culture. We who are involved in the disability culture, we know in a very vague, sort of ambiguous, floaty kind of butterfly way what that means, but we have trouble putting it into words to try to prove to other people that it really exists. So CHERYL has been spending the last several weeks trying to do that so that she could come up here and sound like an anthropologist. So I introduce you now our keynote speaker, CHERYL Marie Wade.
Hear it. I'm sure that was just encouragement. Okay, disability culture. Say what? But aren't disabled people just isolated victims of nature or circumstance? Yes and no. It is true, we are far too often isolated, locked away in the pits, closets, and institutions of enlightened societies everywhere. But more and more, there is a growing consciousness among us that is not acceptable, because there is always an underground, and notes get passed among survivors. And the notes we're passing these days say, there's power in difference. Power. Pass the word. Culture. It's about passing the word. And disability culture is passing the word that there's a new identity, new definition to disability, and it includes power. Culture, new definitions, new inflections. No longer just poor, cripple, also cripple, and yeah, most of the time just cripple, a body happening. But on a real good day, why not? A body happening. Dig it or not. Culture. It's finding a history, naming and claiming ancestors, heroes. As invisibles, our history is hidden, locked away, buried. Our ancestors, our heroes, buried in the pages, unrecognized, unnamed. Disability culture is recognizing, is naming. Naming and claiming our ancestors, our heroes. Like Helen Keller. Now, not the miracle worker version we're also familiar with, not her, but the social activist, the reformer, the woman who tried so desperately to use her celebrity to tell the truth of disability, that it has far more to do with poverty and oppression and the restriction of choices than it has to do with wilted muscles or milky eyes. And for her efforts to tell this truth, she was demeaned. She was ridiculed publicly. And because Helen Keller was a survivor, and that is, of course, the first thing any culture needs, survivors who live long enough so that some portion of the truth makes it to the next generation. And because Helen Keller was a survivor, she pulled back from telling that fuller truth. Because that's often what survivors have to do. They have to swallow the rage and wear the mask, and yes, pull back from telling it exactly like it is, so that there might be a next generation. And so Helen Keller was a survivor, and she is our ancestor, our hero, and we honor her. Naming and claiming our ancestors, our hidden history, our ancestors that are hidden, like the thousands of mental and physical defectives who were singled out for special treatment by the Nazis. Yes, disability culture is recognizing that we were the first victims of the Holocaust. We are the people that the Nazis refined their methods of torture on. We must honor these unnamed victims as our ancestors. We must raise their unmarked graves into our consciousness, into the consciousness of America, so that it can never happen again. And just as Native Americans insist the true name of discovery is genocide, so more and more of us insist the true name of a right to die with dignity, without opportunity to live with dignity, is murder, the first syllable of genocide. Naming and claiming our ancestors, our heroes. Like all those circus and carnival freaks, the first disability performance artists, yes, those rowdy outcasts who emphasized the otherness and made work, made a career, gave themselves a life. Now maybe it was a harsh life, maybe even a brutal life sometimes, but it was a life not locked away in the institutions designed for the excessively different that have always been such a prominent part of the American economy. So yes, they are our ancestors, our heroes, and we honor them. Naming and claiming our heroes, our ancestors. Now most of you are familiar with the story of James Meredith, a great African-American freedom fighter who helped to break the color barrier, the racial barrier to higher education by insisting he had a right to an education. And without that insistence, the doors to Ole Miss would have remained closed. But how many of you know the story of Ed Roberts, crippled freedom fighter, disabled man, who armed with self-esteem and a portable respirator, helped to break the disability barriers to higher learning by insisting that he had a right to an education, by insisting that the doors to the University of California at Berkeley be opened. And by doing that, he helped to lay a significant brick onto the foundation of the independent living movement. The independent living movement. The language of that, independent living movement. My God, what a revolution of identities and possibilities for us. Now, you may not have heard of the independent living movement because it never made it into prime time. Norman Mailer did not rush out to capture its essence in 30,000 words or less. But it took root, and it grew, and it spread across this country, and it has spread around the world, because there is always an underground, and notes get passed among survivors. And the notes we're passing these days, they say there is power in difference. Power. Pass the word. Disability culture. What is it about? It's simple. It's just, here's disability from the inside out. Culture. Passing the word. Now maybe the word is the moan and wail of a blues. Or maybe it's the fierce rhythms and clicking heels and castanets of a flamenco. Maybe it's outsider art. Passing the word. Now maybe the word is authentic movement. That dance that flows from the real body notes of cripples. Or maybe it's the way pieces of cloth are stitched together to commemorate a life, to remember a name. Or maybe it's American Sign Language, a language that laid the foundation for a cultural identity of a people, deaf people, that has bloomed into performance art, ASL mime, theater of the deaf. Culture. Sometimes it happens over coffee or on a picket line. A poem gets said, passed along, and passed back, amended, embellished, and then it's passed along again. Language gets claimed. Ms., gay, crip. Guerrilla theater becomes theater with a soul. Teatro Campesino, the dance theater of Harlem, and of course, Rye Crips, disabled women's theater group. Radical, true, passing the word. Now maybe you've been deprived so far. Maybe your only image, your only identity of disability is that of victim. Perhaps all you know of us is Jerry's kids, those doom-drenched poster children hauled out once a year to wring your charitable pockets dry. But I promise you, you will also come to know us as Jerry's orphans, no longer the grateful recipients of tear-filled handouts. More and more, we are proud freedom fighters, taken to the streets, picket signs strapped to our wheelchairs. No longer are we grateful, polite tin cuppers waiting for generous inclusion. More and more, we are proud freedom fighters, taking to the stages, raising our speech-impaired voices in celebration of who we are. No longer the invisible people with no definition beyond other. More and more, we are proud. We are freedom fighters, taking to the streets and taking to the stages, raising gnarly fists in defiance of the narrow, bloodless images of disability, of our complex humanity, shoved down the American consciousness daily. And these changes will happen, just as the independent living movement happened, just as the Rehabilitation 504 regulations happened, just as at long last the American Disabilities Act happened, and just as now the Corporation on Telecommunications and Disability, however you pronounce it, CDT NoCal, let's put it that way, it's less of a mouthful, we're happening. And why? Because there is always, always an underground, and notes will be passed among survivors. And the notes we are passing these days, they do say there is power in difference. Power. Pass the word. Disability culture. What is it really about? It's just this coming at you from the inside out. We invite you to open and to listen. Because if you do, no explanation of who we are and what our culture is will be necessary. We invite you to open and to listen. Because if you do, I can assure you, no explanation of who we are and what our culture is will be adequate. And I would like to remind you that what you will see and hear in this short program is just a tiny taste of who we are and what we have to offer. Because we here at CDT NoCal are just one small cultural group, and our focus is the arts and media. What we're trying to do here is just bring you a few more, hopefully vibrant colors for your disability palette. And we hope that when you have those colors, you'll fill in those black and white stereotypes with all kinds of nuances and shadings, because see, it'll give the picture some depth, some life, and we think that'll be good for all of us. So, all of us here at CDT Northern California Chapter invite you today to open, to listen, and most especially, enjoy. Thank you.